The old Grandview Theater was a ghost itself, a skeletal carcass of what it once was. Nestled in a forgotten corner of a small town in upstate New York, its marquee, rusted and faded, still promised a final, grand showing from 1950. The date was chipped, and the light bulbs were long gone, swallowed by rust. But I, Julian Carter, a sound engineer with a penchant for the arcane, saw something else. I saw a challenge, a lost masterpiece. My mission was simple, or so I was told. The last film ever shown here, a long-lost silent film titled Echoes of the Void, had a mysterious unreleased soundtrack. My client, a wealthy, eccentric film historian, believed it held the key to a legendary, innovative sound design that was decades ahead of its time. He offered me a fortune to find and restore it, to bring the whispers of the past back to life. I accepted without hesitation. The idea of resurrecting a lost art form thrilled me. I never believed in ghosts. I believed in frequencies, wavelengths, and the measurable science of sound. The first few days were a blur of dust, cobwebs, and the musty scent of decay. My equipment, a high-end digital audio workstation, a pristine microphone, and a set of noise-canceling headphones, felt jarringly modern against the backdrop of peeling velvet seats and the towering, moth-eaten stage curtain. I set up my workstation in the projection booth high above the main auditorium. It was the heart of the theater, a place where light and sound once converged to create magic. Now, it was a tomb. My work began with a meticulous scan of the old projection room. I found the film reels first, brittle and discolored, but miraculously still intact. The soundtrack, however, was a separate beast. It was recorded on a series of archaic wax cylinders, each one housed in a small, ornate wooden box. I carefully moved them, their surfaces cool and slick to the touch. As I handled them, I felt a strange, humming vibration, almost a low-frequency resonance that went through my fingertips and settled in the marrow of my bones. I shook it off. It was just old wax, reacting to the shift in air pressure. Nothing more. The first cylinder was titled Prelude. I placed it on my digital transfer rig, a piece of custom-built tech that could read and convert any analog sound format. I put on my headphones, a shield against the silence of the theater, and pressed play. A low hum filled my ears, the expected hiss of an old recording. Then, a single, clear note from a cello, deep and mournful. It was beautiful, but quickly other sounds layered on top of it. A rustling like dry leaves skittering across a floor. The gentle creak of a chair. A distant, childlike giggle that seemed to float from the back of the auditorium. I frowned, adjusting the levels. These were not part of the score. They were sound artifacts, environmental noise captured during the recording process. I focused on isolating and cleaning them, but as I worked, a chill prickled the hairs on the back of my neck. The sounds weren't just background noise, they were subtly changing. The rustling grew more frantic, the creaking became a slow, deliberate groan. The giggle. It was no longer innocent. It held a chilling, mocking quality. It was a laugh that knew a secret I didn't. I pulled off my headphones, my heart pounding. The theater was dead silent. The only sound was the thrum of my computer fans. I told myself I was tired, my mind playing tricks. The isolation of the place was getting to me. I went down to the auditorium to stretch my legs and clear my head. That's when I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound coming from the stage. A single footstep. A pause. Another footstep. The slow, rhythmic tread of someone walking across the floorboards. I froze, every muscle tense. I knew I was alone. The caretaker had given me the only key. I told myself it was the settling of the old building, the wood groaning under its own weight. But the sound wasn't random. It was a deliberate, methodical rhythm. I walked toward the stage, my flashlight beam cutting a swathe through the darkness. The footsteps stopped. The silence returned, thicker and heavier than before. I shone the light on the stage, the dust motes dancing in the beam like a million tiny ghosts. Nothing. My phone rang, making me jump. It was my client. "Julian, how's the progress?" he asked. his voice a welcome anchor to reality. "It's good," I said, my voice betraying the tremor in my hands. "The cylinders are in decent shape. A lot of audio to clean up, though. It's full of environmental noise." "Ah, yes," he said with a sigh. "The story says the composer was obsessive about capturing the true essence of the theater. He believed the space itself was a character in the performance. He would leave recording devices hidden everywhere." My blood ran cold. The creaks, the rustling, the giggle. They weren't artifacts. They were intentional. He had recorded them. And if he recorded them, what else had he captured? I went back to the projection booth, my mind racing. I was no longer a restorer. I was an archaeologist of fear. I put on my headphones again, the world outside vanishing. I started the transfer of the second cylinder, a piece titled Interlude. This time the sound was even more unsettling, a single, strained violin note, sharp and grating. And underneath it, a new layer of noise. Not a creak or a rustle. This was a breath. The shallow, struggling intake of air, like someone was hiding just feet away from the microphone, fighting not to make a sound. Then a sound that made my skin crawl. A faint, guttural whisper, too distorted to make out the words. It was like a living thing, squirming just at the edge of my hearing. I tried to isolate it, to clean it, to bring it into focus. As I tweaked the sound waves, the whisper became clearer, the voice hoarse and ragged. It was not a language I recognized. It was a chaotic jumble of sounds, a stream of consciousness delivered in a chilling, rasping tone. My vision blurred. I felt dizzy, my head pounding with the rhythm of the whispering. Then the whisper stopped. The violin note swelled, piercingly loud. And in that moment, I heard it. A single, sharp, metallic click. The sound of a door locking. I ripped off my headphones, my heart hammering against my ribs. The projection booth door was behind me. I turned, my hand reaching for the knob, but before I could touch it, the sound repeated. Click. It wasn't a recording. It was real. It was coming from the door. My blood turned to ice. I was alone, high in the projection booth, and the only way out was locked. A deep, bone-rattling laugh echoed from the auditorium below, a sound I had never heard before, but which I knew, with a certainty that reached into the darkest corners of my soul, was the same mocking giggle I had heard in my headphones. It wasn't the theater. It was me. The sounds were playing on my mind, burrowing inside me. The stage wasn't a platform for performance, it was a cage. I was the audience, and the show had just begun. And in the oppressive, suffocating silence that followed the laugh, I realized a horrifying truth. I was trapped not in a theater, but in a symphony of pure, unfiltered dread. And the conductor was a ghost that communicated only in sound. I stood frozen in the projection booth, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The lock was simple, a sliding bolt I'd seen 1,000 times. But the click I'd heard was unmistakable. A sharp, final sound that resonated not just in my ears, but in my very soul. Below, the echoing laughter faded, swallowed by the cavernous darkness of the auditorium. My mind, a fortress built on logic and science, was under siege. This is impossible, I told myself, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It's a trick. Someone is here. The client must have hired an actor for some twisted publicity stunt, but the laughter, the sound of it, it was raw, ancient, and utterly devoid of human mirth. It was the sound of a predator toying with its prey. I went back to my workstation, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I had to focus on the work, on the science. I put my headphones back on, the soft leather muffling the outside world and trapping me with the sounds of the past. The transfer of the second cylinder was complete. The audio file was on my screen, a jagged, chaotic waveform. I isolated the whispering segment, amplifying it, cleaning the static. As the sound waves became clearer, so did the whisper. It wasn't a language as I'd initially thought. It was a rhythmic chant, a repeating series of guttural, clicking sounds, and within that chaos I finally made out a single, repeating phrase. A name that was not my own but felt oddly familiar. Mahlan, Mahlan, Mahlan. My vision swam. A piercing headache seized me, a spike of pain right behind my eyes. The lights of my workstation flickered. The familiar hum of the electronics became a frantic, high-pitched whine. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay and something else, something sweet, like wilting lilies. I ripped my headphones off, gasping for air. The computer screen went black. The silence that followed was a physical presence, a suffocating blanket. Panic clawed at my throat. I stood up, my legs wobbly, and stumbled toward the door. I had to get out. Stunt or no stunt, this place was sick. I rattled the doorknob, but it didn't budge. I pushed, I pulled, I threw my shoulder against it. Nothing. It was a solid, immovable barrier. I was trapped. I backed away from the door, my flashlight beam sweeping wildly across the small room. My eyes fell upon the old, forgotten records stacked in a corner. They were from the 1950s, dusty covers promising grand productions and forgotten stars. I picked one up, my hands trembling. It was a playbill for Echoes of the Void. The lead actor was a man named Mahlan. My blood ran cold. The whisper wasn't just a sound, it was a ghost calling out to its past. But how? The whisper was on the recording, made by the composer decades ago. Was the composer communicating with Mahlan? Was Mahlan the true subject of this symphony of terror? A sudden, sharp snap echoed from the auditorium below. A splintering sound, like wood breaking. I froze, listening. Then, a low, rasping groan. It wasn't a person, it was the sound of a chair being dragged slowly across the floorboards of the stage. A single, deliberate drag. Then, silence, followed by another slow drag. The pace was agonizingly slow, rhythmic, and intentional. It was crawling. I pressed my face against the small, grimy window of the projection booth, peering down into the darkness. My flashlight was useless against the vastness of the theater. The chairs below were mere shadows, the stage, an abyss. Drag. I gripped the windowsill, my knuckles white. This couldn't be happening. My mind, my rational, scientific mind, was failing me. The sounds were playing with my senses, exploiting my fear of the unknown. I had to fight back. I was a sound engineer. I understood frequencies. I would beat this ghost at its own game. I turned back to my workstation. The screen was still black, but a single blinking cursor appeared. A command line. I typed, my fingers flying, a series of complex commands to force a system reboot. But as I typed, the cursor began to move on its own. It typed a single word: run. A jolt of pure terror went through me. I yanked my hands back as if the keyboard were hot. The computer was no longer mine. It had a will of its own. A new line of text appeared, a simple question: do you believe now? And then, a sound. It came not from my speakers, but from the air around me. A new sound, one that had not been on the recording. It was a whisper, but it was not the distorted voice of the past. It was my own voice, clear and cold, speaking a name: Julian. It was a perfect replica of my voice. It wasn't just a recording. It was a living echo, a reflection of my inner self. The whisper was coming from all directions at once, bouncing off the walls, a perfect 360-degree soundscape that wrapped around my skull. It wasn't the ghost speaking. It was me. It was me talking to myself, but the words were not my own. The whisper of Julian began to speed up, repeating faster and faster, a horrifying chorus that echoed the beating of my heart. The whispering grew frantic, turning into a chilling, panicked scream, the sound of my own voice screaming my own name. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside my head. And as the scream reached its crescendo, I heard a low, throaty laugh coming from the auditorium below. It wasn't the mocking giggle from before. It was a laugh of satisfaction, the sound of a hunter who has finally cornered its prey. I looked down at the command line on the now blinking screen. A new question appeared, simple and terrifying. Do you fear now? I couldn't answer. I was beyond words. I was just a vessel, filled with a sound I could not escape. I was the composer's final symphony, and my mind was the instrument. The ghost wasn't a spirit haunting a building. It was a sound, a frequency of dread that haunted a man. And I was that man. The final note was about to be played. The scream in my mind shattered the last vestiges of my sanity. It was no longer a recording of my voice, it was my voice, a direct feed from my very own panic. I fell to my knees, clawing at my head, a desperate attempt to stop the cacophony. The computer screen was now a mirror, a reflection of my terrified, sweat-soaked face. Below me, the auditorium was pitch black, a silent maw waiting to swallow me whole. The only light was the eerie, flickering glow from my workstation, a sickly green that painted the projection booth in a spectral hue. Julian, a whisper, my own voice emerged, not from the headphones, but from the darkness behind me. It was so close, I felt the phantom breath on my neck. The void is waiting. I scrambled back, tripping over a forgotten cable. My hand landed on one of the wax cylinders, a cold, hard disc under my palm. I stared at it, a sudden, horrifying realization dawning on me. The composer hadn't just recorded the theater's sounds, he had recorded his own madness. And he wasn't just a composer. He was a conductor, a master manipulator of human fear. The recordings weren't just sound files, they were traps, encoded frequencies designed to dismantle a mind piece by terrifying piece. The silent film, Echoes of the Void, was not a story of the past. It was a manual, a guide to creating a symphony of dread. The lost soundtrack wasn't meant to be heard. It was meant to be felt. It was a psychological weapon, and I was its latest victim. The ghost wasn't the dead composer. It was the sound itself, an insidious, non-physical entity that lived on in the very fabric of the recordings. A new sound began to fill the room. A slow, deliberate series of notes played on a lone piano. It was a lullaby, a haunting melody that was both beautiful and utterly terrifying. As the notes played, the shadows in the room seemed to move, twisting into grotesque shapes. My reflection in the computer screen began to distort, my eyes widening, my mouth stretching into a silent, gaping scream. The image wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was a living portrait of my fear. The piano notes grew louder, faster. The lullaby morphed into a frenetic, discordant symphony. My reflection mirrored the shift, its contorted face twitching with every jarring note. The room began to spin, the walls warping, the ceiling tilting. My rational mind was a crumbling fortress, and the sound was the battering ram that had finally broken through. I was no longer Julian Carter, the sound engineer. I was an instrument, playing the final movement of a symphony of my own destruction. And then, the sound stopped. Complete, utter silence. Not the silence of a dead theater, but the deafening silence of a mind that had gone completely blank. The flickering screen was dark. My reflection was gone. The shadows were still. I was alone in a void of silence. I couldn't hear the hum of the air conditioning, the thrum of my own pulse, or even my own breath. Nothing. I was in the void. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but my limbs wouldn't respond. I was a puppet with severed strings, a mind trapped in a body that no longer belonged to it. The composer's final, most terrifying trick wasn't to fill my mind with sound, but to steal all sound away, leaving me in a terrifying, soundless prison. Suddenly, a new sensation. A whisper, not in my ears but in my thoughts. A voice, hoarse and ragged, the same voice from the recording. "Welcome," it rasped, "to the final show." And in the silent darkness I saw him. Not a ghost, not an apparition. He was a man made of static, a shimmering outline of a figure standing on the stage below, his arms raised as if conducting an orchestra only he could hear. The stage lights, long dead, flickered to life, illuminating a scene of pure horror. The seats in the auditorium were filled with people, their faces pale and gaunt, their eyes wide and empty. And they were all looking at me. They were the original audience of Echoes of the Void, the ones who had listened to the final show, the ones who had been trapped in the void forever. He, the composer, lowered his hands. The audience below turned its head in unison to face me. Their mouths opened and a single unified scream, a deafening, silent scream that echoed only in my head, filled the void. I was no longer an engineer. I was the performer, and my terror was the music. The scream wasn't from a ghost. It was the collective scream of all the minds that had been shattered by the symphony. It was the sound of 1,000 souls trapped in an eternal, silent torment. And now my soul would join them. I had finally found the lost soundtrack. It was the song of the dead, and it played only in the minds of those foolish enough to listen. I tried to close my eyes, to escape the horrifying tableau, but I couldn't. I was trapped, my senses screaming even as the world around me was silent. The show had begun, and I was the star. The final note was my own descent into madness, a beautiful, horrifying melody of pure dread. The audience waited for my scream, and I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the wax cylinder in my hand, that it would never come. For the scream was already playing, and it would play forever, an echo in the void that was once my mind. The name Twin Peaks conjured images of misty Pacific Northwest beauty, a place of serene pines and hushed mountains. But as a seasoned hiker, I knew the real Twin Peaks was a different beast. It was rugged, unforgiving, and, in the dead of night, utterly terrifying. I was a few hours into a solo trek, a last-minute detour on my way to meet a friend, and a wrong turn had left me stranded. The trail I was on wasn't on any of my topographical maps. It was a faint, almost invisible scar on the forest floor, swallowed by dense fog. My flashlight beam was a weak, pathetic pinprick against the inky blackness. The air was bone-chillingly cold, a kind of deep, damp cold that felt like it was seeping into my very bones. The only sound was the rhythmic thud of my boots and the crunch of dead leaves beneath them. It was a silence that wasn't silent at all. It was a pressurized vacuum, a void waiting to be filled. That's when I saw it. The cabin. It wasn't marked on any map, but there it was. A dilapidated wooden shack half hidden by a curtain of gnarled trees. A single flickering light seemed to be coming from inside. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a lifeline in the middle of this desolate forest. I pushed open the splintered, groaning door. The light inside wasn't a lamp or a fire. It was a small, flickering glow coming from a candle on a dusty wooden table. The cabin itself was a mess. Cobwebs clung to every surface, and the air was thick with the smell of mold and something else. Something sweet and sickly, like rotten flowers. There was no one there. The silence was so profound it felt like a physical presence. My eyes landed on the table. Beside the candle, there was an old, leather-bound sketchbook. It was open to a blank page. The pages were yellowed with age, and the cover was marked with a single, crudely drawn eye. My curiosity, a trait that had saved me more times than not, took over. I picked up the book, and as my fingers closed around the leather, the candle flame jumped, casting dancing, frantic shadows across the walls. I flipped the book open. The pages were filled with disturbingly detailed drawings, not of people or places, but of eyes and mouths. Just eyes, just mouths. They were all different. Some were wide with terror, others narrowed with rage. Some were crying, and some were screaming in silent agony. They were meticulously rendered, each one a window into an abyss of fear. I was so engrossed in the horrifying artistry that I almost didn't notice it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound coming from outside the cabin. A whisper. It was my name. Dan. Dan. It was a woman's voice, soft and pleading, carried on the wind. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I was alone out here. There was no one. I went to the window and peered out into the darkness. Nothing, just the endless curtain of fog. I was about to turn away when something caught my attention in the reflection on the grimy glass. It wasn't my reflection. It was a face, pale and gaunt, right behind me. Its eyes were wide and its mouth was a silent, open maw. I whipped around, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. There was nothing there. The cabin was empty. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, but when I looked, my hand was the only one there. I looked back at the sketchbook in my hand. It had flipped on its own. The page it was now open to was new, freshly drawn in what looked like charcoal. It was a pair of eyes, wide and terrified. My eyes. And beneath them, a mouth, stretched into a silent scream. My mouth. As I stared at the drawing, a new line appeared, a single word scrawled underneath the image. Next. A chill that had nothing to do with the outside air swept through me. It wasn't just a sketch. It was a portrait of my future. The whispering outside started again, but this time it was a chorus of voices all calling my name. And they were getting closer. I had to get out, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. The candle flame suddenly flared, casting a shadow that was not my own on the wall behind me. The shadow was taller, more gaunt, and its arms were outstretched, as if reaching for me. The whispers were right outside the door now, and a new sound joined them. A low, scraping noise like fingernails on wood. I was not alone, and whatever was out there, it wanted me to join the pages of this book. The scraping sound on the door intensified, a relentless splintering noise that sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. My heart hammered in my ears, drowning out the chorus of whispers outside. I backed away from the door, my eyes fixed on the grimy glass. The voices were a fevered chant now, no longer pleading but demanding. Let us in! Let us in! I tore my gaze away from the door and ran to the back of the cabin, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the cobweb-draped walls. My only hope was to find a window I could break, an escape route. That's when I saw it. The back of the cabin was a solid wall of thick, old wood. No windows. I was trapped. I turned back towards the room, my mind a frantic scramble. The candle on the table had gone out, but a faint silvery light now illuminated the pages of the sketchbook. My eyes were drawn to the last drawing, the one of my terrified face, but the scrawled word below it had changed. It no longer read, next. It now read, in. A new drawing had appeared on the adjacent page. A mirror, perfectly framed. The mirror I had seen in my reflection. I had to look at it. My feet moved on their own, a horrible, sickening feeling of being pulled, of my body not being my own. I raised the book, and the reflection on the glass of the front door was no longer my own. It was a distorted, gaunt figure, its body unnaturally tall and thin, its face a swirling mass of agony. It was the figure from my reflection. But this time, it was clear. And it was holding up a hand. Its fingers were long, bony, and ended in sharp, blackened points. It was not a mirror, but a portal. Then a new voice. A soft, sing-song voice seemed to come from inside the sketchbook itself. He's watching you. Don't look at the eyes. He will take them. The whispers outside suddenly changed. They became a chorus of pained whimpers and pleas. Our eyes. He took our eyes. Give them back. I realized with a sickening jolt of understanding that the killer wasn't a person. The real killer, the original killer, wasn't a human. It was something else. A creature that stole the eyes and souls of its victims and trapped them in a book. The whispers were the ghosts of its victims, and the drawings were their captured screams. The figure in the reflection was not a ghost. It was the killer itself, and it wanted me to look into its eyes. I fought the compulsion, forcing my gaze away from the door's reflection. I looked at the old, dusty radio on a shelf. Its knob began to turn on its own, a crackle of static filling the air. It landed on a single station, and a voice, cold and dead, came through the speakers. They came here. They saw the truth. They didn't believe. The voice was talking about me. The radio was not just a prop, it was a connection. I looked back at the sketchbook. A new drawing was forming on the pages. It was a figure on a mountain, holding a phone with no signal. I realized with a gut-wrenching dread that it was not my phone. It was the phone of the last victim, the last person to be trapped here. The whispers outside screamed louder, a cacophony of agony. The figure in the reflection on the door raised its other hand, and in that hand was a phone. I looked at my phone in my pocket and the screen flashed. A text message appeared from an unknown number. It read, "I know you're in there. Don't look at the eyes." My mind was in chaos. Who was sending the text? Was it a friend who knew my location? A good ghost trying to help me, or a more terrifying trap? I looked back at the sketchbook. The new drawing was finished. It showed me, my phone in my hand, staring at the screen. Below it, the scrawled word had changed again. It read, "Lost." I was lost, and whatever was outside knew it. The whispers were right outside the door, and the scraping was getting louder, the wood beginning to give way. The killer was coming in, and I had to decide if I would believe the text message or face the horrifying reality of what was coming through that door. The splintering of the door was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It wasn't the sound of a door being broken, but of wood being torn apart by something with unnatural strength. The whispers outside had reached a frenzied pitch, and I could feel the cold seeping through the gaps in the wood. My phone buzzed again in my hand. Another text from the same unknown number. This one read, "The book, the radio, they are the eyes." My mind connected the dots with a terrifying jolt. The sketchbook with its drawings of eyes and mouths, and the old radio playing that dead, monotone voice. They weren't just objects. They were the means by which the killer saw and spoke. They were the eyes and mouth of the creature itself. The figure I had seen in the door's reflection. It was a manifestation, a vessel of its true self. The door burst inward, with a sickening crack, and a frigid gust of wind blew through the cabin, extinguishing the candle for good. The light from my phone was the only source now. In the doorway stood a monstrous figure, tall and gaunt, its body made of gnarled branches and mud. Its head was a swirling void, and in the place where its eyes should have been, there was nothing. It had no eyes of its own. It needed to steal them. It took a shambling step toward me, its limbs twisting and bending in ways that no living thing should. It wasn't just a killer, it was a hunter of souls. It wanted to trap me, to make me a part of its collection of eyes and mouths. My gaze fell on the two objects, the sketchbook and the radio. The whispers were a deafening roar now, filling my mind with the terrified pleas of its victims. Our eyes, our voices. He stole them. He's coming for you. I had to act fast. I ran to the table and grabbed the sketchbook. Its pages were filled with my terrified face, my screaming mouth, my pleading eyes. It was me. My fate was already being written. But the text from the unknown number had given me a new kind of terror, a new idea. It hadn't told me to run. It had told me to understand. I took the book and threw it at the radio. The leather-bound sketchbook hit the old radio with a loud wooden thud. The radio crackled and went silent. The static that had filled the air, the dead voice, it was gone. The whispers in my head stopped. The creature in the doorway let out a guttural shriek of pure, unadulterated rage. It was blind. Its eyes were gone. It was thrashing now, its long, spindly arms swinging wildly. It had lost its sight. My phone buzzed a final time. The screen flashed with a new text. "The true path is in the light." I looked at the window. The reflection was gone, and outside, a faint light, a glimmer of an exit, appeared on the trail. The fog was finally beginning to lift. I had a chance. I scrambled past the now blinded creature and burst out the door, running as fast as I could. I didn't look back. I just followed the light. The faint whispers returned, not in my mind, but from the trees and rocks around me. This time they weren't malicious. They were a chorus of silent thanks. The ghosts of the victims, the ones with their eyes and mouths drawn in the book, were gone. They were free. I ran for what felt like miles, my lungs burning, until I stumbled out of the trail and onto a paved road. In the distance, I saw the flashing lights of a police car. I had made it. I was safe, or so I thought. A few days later, I was back home, trying to forget what had happened. I was sitting at my desk looking at the photos I had taken on my hiking trip. I went to delete the last one, a selfie I had taken right before my phone died on the trail. I stopped. The picture was perfect. My face, my smile, my eyes. Everything was fine. Until I zoomed in. In the reflection of my eyes, a tiny, almost imperceptible detail could be seen. A tiny, faint reflection of a monstrous face. A gaunt, eyeless face with a wide, screaming mouth. It had found a way to follow me. It was in my eyes. The whispers started again, not in the wind, not from a book, but from deep within my own mind. It had been trapped in the reflection, and now it was trapped inside me, and it was patiently waiting.